I am ready, though not necessarily prepared. It's a difference, yeah? Because ready means it's your time, so you have to go on, right? As opposed to being prepared, which means like you feel you have everything you need under control. That's a different matter.
No se preocupe que estamos en su casa sentado en el mueble hablando.
Yeah.
Sally, you're muted, by the way.
Okay, you guys can get started whenever you're ready.
You're muted, Sally.
Okay.
There you go. So, bienvenidos a todos. On behalf of Encultured Company, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's interview with Dr. Silvio Torres-Saillant. And the topic of our conversation tonight is going to be Dominican Blackness, from slave uprisings to Black Lives Matter. We're so excited and happy to have all of you with us here tonight. This is our first in our 2020 edition of our Summer School series, where we invite scholars of Dominican and Haitian descent to talk to us about their work and the contribution that they're making toward our shared vision of justice and healing for the people of the Dominican Republic and Haiti and her diasporas. My name is Alexis Francisco, and I'm one of the facilitators within Encultured Company. You're muted, Sally. And this is our first time using a Zoom webinar format, so we're gonna ask for some patience as we work through any tech glitches that come up.
Okay, so my name is Sally Garcia. I am also a facilitator within Encultured Company. We're really excited that you're all here with us today.
And our guest tonight, as I already mentioned, we are so excited and honored to have him with us. Our guest tonight is Dr. Silvio Torres-Saillant. Dr. Torres-Saillant was born in Santiago, República Dominicana. He is professor of English in the College of Arts and Sciences at Syracuse University, where he headed the Latino Latin American Studies program until 2009. He's held the post of William P. Tolley Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Humanities from 2009 to 2011, and served as the director of the Humanities Council from 2012 to 2014. During the academic year 2005 to 2006, he was the Wilbur Marvin Visiting Scholar at Harvard University's David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. And Dr. Torres-Saillant is the founding director of the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute at CUNY here in the city of New York. And we're so excited particularly to talk to him tonight about a text that he wrote called Introduction to Dominican Blackness. I know it's been a really important text for me in my life, and I know also with Saudi and the rest of our team. And so we're just really excited to have you all with us for this incredibly important conversation tonight. Yeah, I'll turn it over. Oh, you're muted, Sally.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so as we know, every once in a while, a meme circulates online about how Dominicans don't know they're Black and they're not going to Wakanda. It's a meme, it's a caricature that circulates so often that we sometimes don't take the time to try to understand the roots of that caricature. And so today, what we're going to do is have a conversation that really challenges that caricaturing of Dominican identity, of Dominican Blackness, by really being in conversation with someone who has theorized our identity in depth and who has written extensively about it. So what we're gonna do, what we're hoping to do, what our intention is to really get an in-depth analysis of the emergence of Dominican identity in a socio-historical context. And that's especially important so that we can understand Dominicanidad and its meaning in this particular moment of Black Lives Matter. So that's what we're hoping to do, and we'll take your questions at the end. And we're very excited to be in conversation with Dr. Silvio Torres-Saillant.
Thank you, Sally. So yeah, as we get into this conversation, we do invite you to type your questions into the Q&A, type your comments into the chat box. We're gonna be checking them as we go through, and at the end, we're gonna have about a half an hour for question and answer with Dr. Torres-Saillant. So if you have like burning hot questions that come up for you as you're listening to the conversation tonight, we definitely invite you to let us know what you're thinking, put your questions into the question box, and we'll definitely have an opportunity to take some of those at the end. So are you ready? You all ready? Okay, great. So we could, there's so many different topics in this text, Professor, that we could get into here tonight. So it was really hard for us to, you know, narrow it down for the sake of the hour or so that we have in conversation with you. But we do want to begin with this notion of the meme or the online conversation that Salvi talked about, this sort of narrative that Dominicans are self-hating Latinos that don't know that they're Black. And your introduction to Dominican Blackness actually begins by critiquing that kind of thinking, as well as the way that the DR has been written about in Latin American and Black scholarship, and firmly situating the DR within what you call the Black Atlantic. And you use this phrase of the Dominican Republic as the cradle of Blackness in the Americas. So would you tell us a little bit about that notion, that concept, and why don't you think that we think about, why do you think it is that we don't think about the DR in that way?
Well, first of all, thank you for the entire InCulture team for the invitation and for honoring me actually with this opportunity to speak with all of you. I'm very grateful. I always enjoy the opportunity to do what I do in the classroom. You know, this is a much larger classroom. I have to begin though with a disclaimer. The publicity touted me as the person who actually wrote the book on Dominican Blackness. Yeah, and that may be true. Yeah, especially if you think of it as Dominican, as a person from the diaspora. There was already generations of African, of Afro-Dominican research in the Dominican Republic that, that needs to be recovered. And I have tried to do some recovery of that. The Dominican Studies Institute published the famous book by Franklin Franco, Blacks, Mulattoes, what is it called? Saudi Blacks, Mulattoes, and the Dominican Nation, by Franklin Franco, a book which was published in 1969 and has never gone out of print. It's on its 25th edition or something like that. So it is not that Black studies, right, did not exist in the Dominican Republic. It has existed for a long time, and part of what I did was to actually take advantage of that legacy in that piece. But there's another way of disclaiming my authority here. I wrote that book. I wrote that pamphlet, which is a 90-page document. It was published in 1999. Since then, I have been doing a lot more learning. Yeah, I have been thinking more about the subject, and there are many things that I would say now differently as a result of how much more my engagement with the topic has become over these past 20 years. Yeah, one of the areas in which my thinking has changed is in that I no longer view the problem of Dominicans with Blackness, yeah, as something unique to the Dominican Republic. Right now, it is absolutely very clear to me that Blackness has been a problem for the entire hemisphere. Basically, it has been a problem for the entire civilization which the conquest and colonization of the Americas created. Yeah. So that should suffice for now. And I'm now, as a result of how much more learning I've done, I now feel a lot more bewildered by this notion of race and racism. Yeah. The very idea, why don't Dominicans identify themselves as Black, presupposes that that viewing oneself as a racial being is a natural, right? It's a natural instinct, almost as if that's what God made us. Yeah, when we were, thou shalt be, this, and your race will be this. Yeah, that we are not racist. We have become racist. Yeah, as a result of a long history that has to do primarily with the colonial transaction. Yeah, but I become now more humble and bewildered. So, for instance, I am not surprised whatsoever when I look at the rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, some days ago, and I see those Black people in the audience cheering for the Donald. Yeah, I would have been shocked some earlier in my life, but now, since I know how weird race thinking is and how weird race is, I know now that in race anything can happen. Yeah, and anybody can be racist, either towards others or towards themselves. So, for instance, I do not think that the term internalized racism is necessary, because racism is only one. Whether you aim it inwardly or outwardly, it doesn't matter. It is the same thing. It has to do with a particular way of knowing that we inherit from the colonial transaction. And so for now, the people that I admire, the one person that I admired most when talking about social relations is Cornel West. I admire equally. I admire Martin Luther King, but Cornel West now, because Cornel West does something like King did, which was that even as he did his work of social justice, yeah, he also kept an eye on himself, and he never abandoned self-scrutiny. Yeah, he never abandoned self-scrutiny, and so Cornel West says we have to keep us accountable, everybody accountable, those whom we fight and ourselves as well at the same time. Yeah? And so so that's basically my general disclaimer. As to the question, what might explain why Dominicans seem to be caricatured in this way? Is that where the question was going? As people who are self-hating, well, race pride itself is not natural. I remember this man whom I met recently, who told me that he was a very black, man. His skin hue was very dark, very friendly, good-looking older man. And I remember when this was on the way back from a trip somewhere. He took me home, and then we chatted on the way, and we were kind of friendly by the time we got to my house. He actually introduced himself formally to me at that point, and he says, "I'm Yusef. I am from Eritrea, and I'm Muslim." And I said, "Oh my God, you could have all of those identities. You could think of so many other things before you arrive at something that refers specifically to phenotype and to phenotype." So he did not say, "I'm a black man, just like you." Yeah. He told me he was all of these other things. Yeah. And so we need to do some more thinking about why it is that there is this expectation that that we ought to think of ourselves as racial beings first. In the Dominican Republic, the reason is very clear for why we don't think of ourselves as racial beings first. First, the plantation, which was inaugurated the plantation of the Americas, which was inaugurated in Santo Domingo, showed its initial promise there, and created a lot of ingenios, right, plantations, which made a lot of people a lot of money. But it was not the big thing that it would become later in other places, where the importation of enslaved workers would be larger, and where the industry would become gigantic. And so, in a sense, the plantation began in Santo Domingo, but did not thrive, especially since the Dominican Republic was the first colonial outpost of the Spanish Empire in the Americas. The conquest and colonization of Santo Domingo was followed up very quickly by the conquest and colonization of larger territories, where the stuff that the fortune seekers were looking for was more readily available, like the gold of Central America, the precious stones of Central America, all the stuff that they found in Mexico, right? So in a sense, the Santo Domingo, the continued investment in Santo Domingo seemed to be a less profitable enterprise. And so that colony was left kind of unattended from the point of view of its centrality in the colonial transaction. It had been the center of colonial operations. But after all of these other more profitable sites were conquered, Santo Domingo ceased to be a thing, in a sense, And as a result, the enslaved population that lived there, together with the settlers, many of the settlers already impoverished themselves, right? Did not really have a chance to develop a hardcore Jim Crow type color line. And so, yes, slavery continued to exist, but sometimes the master was as poor as a slave himself or herself. And there were instances, for instance, when they would talk amongst themselves, Johnny, why don't you just go and work for yourself? And go downtown and work for yourself and give me 50% of what you make, and that kind of deal. And there's one beautiful story that is told by one of the historians who recover that early memory of this woman who owned a slave whom she had inherited from her parents, about the same age as she, a male slave, and apparently they have become romantically involved, and he captures the story of this woman who takes who takes her slave to the local district office, whatever, right? To grant him his freedom, and then to move several blocks further down to go to the civil court where they will get married, So it got to that point, and as a result, while we retained the ideology, the racial ideology that had been created by that beginning of the plantation, we did not retain the material conditions that would sustain it. And as a result, the whole thing became very fluid. And so it was okay for a white person to have a black spouse, and just as it was okay for a black person to be negrophobic. Right. So all of those lines got sort of confused, and as a result, we ended up developing a sense of identity that tended to be more national than racial. But let me also say this: that is not unique to the Dominican Republic. Throughout the Americas, people are their nationality first, and then their ancestry and phenotype comes after. The same thing with Afro-Colombians, the same thing with all of the other Afro-Peruvians, and so on.
Thank you, Professor. I think we're gonna have some time a little later to talk a little bit more about this racialized consciousness in Latin America in the way that you talk about it. So just to recap, I really hear you saying that the Dominican Republic, or the island that we came to call Hispaniola, right, was, you call it the cradle of blackness in the Americas, not only because it was the first place where enslaved Africans were brought, but we also have these really important critical firsts in the Dominican Republic. You know, the first, the birth of the plantation system, the first Maroons in 1503, the first Black slave insurrection in 1522. So that these firsts really situate the Dominican Republic as a really critical place in this Black Atlantic. But the development of the institution of slavery and the function and the role that the colony held in the way that it unfolded and the way that it was treated ended up creating a society with a very different experience of racialization than even Haiti or the United States. And so that's how we come to have this different understanding.
Until quite recently, I lived in Syracuse in a neighborhood. I'm now living in a university area, but I had lived for many years in a neighborhood which was one of the most impoverished places in the city. As a result, it was also the most racially mixed. Yeah, because you need structures to sustain Jim Crow. Yeah, you need power structures that you need for white people to be more powerful than Black people. In order to sustain Jim Crow. If you don't have that, all hell is going to break loose in terms of the lines that people are going to cross.
Right.
Yeah?
Right. And so it'll be important for us to come back to this later when we talk about the current state of systemic racism in the Dominican Republic, which many people deny, right? And we're very clear is manifesting in some really clear and concrete and death-dealing ways right now currently on the island. But I'm going to turn it over to Sally to take us over into the next section of our conversation.
Thanks, Alexis. So something that comes up often is the birth story of the Dominican Republic. We have been in a continuous debate about what happens in this 1801 to 1865 period, because what happens in that historical period is very crucial for our understanding of what the Dominican Republic became as a nation. And we're constantly having to go into details about the abolition of slavery by Toussaint Louverture in 1801, the abolition of slavery again by President Boyer in 1822, and then the formation, the actual events that led to the formation of the Dominican state. And so in my understanding, there's something that you say in your piece on page 8. It says, Dominican identity consists not only of how Dominicans see themselves, but also how they are seen by the powerful nations with which the DR has been linked and in relationship of political and in relationships of political and economic dependence. And so I'm very curious for you to really give us the breakdown of the Dominican national, the origins of the Dominican national project, because it is from that space where we get a centralizing of the white Creole elite in Dominicanidad. So I think it's really crucial to for us to just have a conversation about, what does 1844 mean? How did it come about? What is the role of Black people in that historical moment? What is the role of slavery and the abolition of slavery in that historical moment? And then just as another side question that we can explore, who historically benefited from 1844 as a national project? And what have been the consequences of excluding Afro-Dominicans from the historical narrative of the founding of the nation?
Okay, so you have Francisco de Rosario Sanchez, who is Afro-Dominicano, right, as one of the founding fathers. And he enlisted in this project of a separation from the Republic of Haiti. So, okay, so what happens? In 1801, first of all, there was the Aranjuez Treaty in 1795. The Aranjuez Treaty was a deal that Spain and France signed, in which Spain would grant to France its portion of the island of Hispaniola. Yeah, how that happened. First of all, you have to understand that in 1605, 1606, there was the so-called period of the devastaciones de Osorio. Governor Osorio was trying to control illegal commerce on the part of the island that would subsequently become Haiti. Yeah, and so this was already a time when the island did not have the resources to fight, quote unquote, the enemy, meaning people from Holland, right? Trying to get a piece of the pie in Hispaniola, and so Spain was unable to deliver to the vecinos in Santo Domingo around that time, and as a result, people would make deals with whoever came to their shores. If they brought goods, if they brought food, if they brought clothing, weapons, you know, people would make deals. But sometimes they'll be making deals with Protestants from the Netherlands, who were the historic enemy of Spain. So they were committing treason, and that needed to be resolved. And so the government failed, the colonial government failed to resolve that problem of that illegal commerce on that side of the island. And as a result, he resorted to just basically burning down the cities that were involved in this illicit commerce, and transporting all of the population to what is now the eastern side of Hispaniola. Yeah. So basically, the western side became a no man's land for many years, and that land was began to be used by pirates, began to be used by marauders of all kinds, until eventually it gradually became known mostly by French piratical entrepreneurs. Yeah, but this was a place where they could do their thing, even though it was on the same island where one of whose halves was under Spanish authority. They would be left alone. So they actually began gradually to make business there. And eventually the business turned into a plantation economy that eventually grew to the point that, and since the majority of the business, right, fortune seekers there were French, France then decided to actually acknowledge that part, that operation there, and began to try to make legal what had been until that point informal. Yeah, that is after the devastation, after the burning of those cities. Eventually, around 1697, there is a treaty whereby France sort of agrees, Spain kind of agrees that the space that France occupies on the island is somewhat okay. And then eventually, in 1777, I believe, there is a formal treaty in which an actual line gets drawn between France and Spain. Yeah, a line dividing. And so the birth of Saint Domingue officially is that line that is drawn in a contract between Spain and France. I'm interested in one thing. The contract between France and Spain, by means of this Aranjuez Treaty, includes among its multiple articles a feature in which the authorities, the colonial authorities of both sides, agree on a policy towards slaves who escape from one side to the other. Yeah? And they agree that whoever escapes from one side to the other will be returned to the side where they belong. which means to me means that there was a clear sense that both parts were equally sort of that were equally attentive to the insurrectional attention of the subaltern populations. Yeah. Okay. Then comes, as you know, the French Revolution, and the French decide that that slavery is a bad thing. Yeah. And so they decide that there cannot be slavery in French territories. Toussaint Louverture actually rises to the attention of French authorities as someone with power and talent to command and authority. Yeah, and he actually proceeds by 1801 proceeds to in 1795. Yeah, 1777 is the Aranjuez Treaty, where the actual frontera is drawn. Yeah, 1795 is when Spain actually agrees to cede to Spain its portion of Hispaniola. So from that moment onward, Hispaniola is only French, but it had to be operationalized. The unification had to be operationalized. So in 1801, when Toussaint arrives in Santo Domingo from Saint-Domingue, yeah, he is doing so as a French general, yeah, with powers to unify the island in keeping with the terms of the 1795 treaty, yeah, between the two powers, yeah. So Toussaint is not yet a Haitian then, yeah. He's a French general, making sure that the dictates of the treaty between the two empires are basically, you know, brought to fruition. And so there's a unification under French rule. Yeah. The first thing, however, because Toussaint is Toussaint, he's also Haitian in a sense. He's also Haitian before Haiti is born in 1804. Yeah. And so he has an issue. He has a problem, specifically a problem with slavery. The first thing he does when he arrives in Santo Domingo is to enact an abolition of slavery. So there are many people who so that is the first abolition of slavery on the Hispanic side of Hispaniola, yeah, in 1801. The second is 1822. It could have been 1821, but it wasn't. 1821 is a time when there's a man named Jose Núñez de Cáceres, who is one of the colonial officers of the Spanish. I'll skip the story. And you can ask me later of how that portion of French Hispaniola, the Spanish-speaking portion of French Hispaniola, went back to being Spanish. Yeah, we can talk about that later. But in 1821, Santo Domingo was again a Spanish colony, and there was this man who decided to be a liberator, Jose Núñez de Cáceres, and he proclaimed an independence from Spain. Independence from Spain that he expected would be supported by Simón Bolívar in La Gran Colombia, yeah, and that would be like a new day for this. One thing that he did not consider, Jose Núñez de Cáceres, was abolition of slavery, which is why I argue when Toussaint Louverture, when President Boyer arrived with his troops a year later, a couple of months after Jose Núñez de Cáceres declares his independence, yeah, and he actually decides that you know, this government cannot go on. Basically, the idea is that Haiti already existed. then in 1822, it was already under hostility by the entire Christian West, yeah? And you could not afford to have a side of the island, a neighbor next door, that was feeble, and it wasn't clear, because that could always be a port of entry for the French to come again and to restore slavery. Yeah. So basically, the decision is to unify the island, and the unification of the island, again, the first thing that President Boyer does is to abolish slavery. Yeah. And so between 1822 and 1844, there is no slavery in Santo Domingo. Yeah. But there is no Dominican Republic yet. What you have is a formerly Spanish colony, which had been French colony for a period, yeah, went back to being Spanish, then came under Haitian jurisdiction, yeah, the island was unified under one government, and that unification lasted 22 years, until the Creole elites, led by the likes of Juan Pablo Duarte, Ramon Matias Mella, Francisco Rosario Sanchez, and the women who were involved in the project as well, they decide to do their own separatist thing, yeah, and they succeed. However, the Black and mulatto population of Santo Domingo remembered whom they owed their non-slavery to, who they owed their freedom to. So they were very curious in a freaking out sort of way, because some of the national anthems that were being rehearsed by this nationalist movement that was proclaiming its independence from Haiti was "A las armas españoles, volad a la lid, tened por principio vencer o morir," right? So the speaker in that national anthem that they were rehearsing was a Spaniard, right? And Spain at that point still had slavery in Cuba and in Puerto Rico. So those Afro-Dominicans, they say, this doesn't smell too good. So what's going to happen here? What are they going to do about us? And before the answer, they did not send a telegram to try to figure out what was going to be our status. Instead, what they did was they took up arms and they mounted an insurrection, which is called in a town now part of La Capital, Santo Domingo, which is called Monte Grande. In Monte Grande, they took up arms and decided ni un paso más, yeah? Ni un paso más, and basically they took up arms. Their impact was so crucial to the burgeoning republic that had just been proclaimed, that the independence leaders realized they had to stop what they were doing and go and talk to those guys in Monte Grande. Yeah? And they went and talked to those guys in Monte Grande. And those guys in Monte Grande said, yeah, we'll put down our arms, but let's talk. What's in it for us? What was in it for them was this. The leaders of the of this government, which was a provisional government, Duarte was not around anymore. It was called La Junta Gubernativa. Yeah, La Junta Gubernativa, the first Dominican government agreed that slavery would never return to the land, never again return to the land, and then further assured. Also on that same edict, where that commitment was made, there was also an invitation to all people of Haitian ancestry, inviting them to join the national project, and to say and very clearly spelling out that the state will back them up in case there were some hyper nationalists going around who might wish to take to take action against them by virtue of the fact that the liberation happened from Haiti. Yeah, and so they were giving assurance by the government, and that is the very first act of the Dominican government. If you look at the history of documents produced by the Dominican government, that is the very first one. There will never be slavery on the land again, and you Haitians living in what from now on is going to be the Dominican Republic, please stay and you have our backing. Yeah, and then 3 months later, when the Dominican Congress gets formed, yeah, the Dominican Congress gets formed in April, I believe. The document I'm referring to is March 1st, 1844. In April, around mid-April, Congress is formed, and they take up and they expand on this edict, and they turn it into a law, an encompassing law. The law includes, yeah, the Dominican Republic will be a haven for the enslaved people of the world. Whoever comes in and steps on Dominican soil becomes instantly free and a Dominican citizen. Yeah? And so that is the beginning, one of the most glorious beginnings in the hemisphere. I'll stop here so that we can talk about, maybe you can have questions about how we lost that, yeah? How we went down from there.
Sally, do you have any follow-up? I know you asked a pretty complex question. I do want to give you an opportunity to, in case you want to add anything. If not, we can move to the next section.
No, Sally, one thing more. I have evidence that by 1847, 3 years later, we still did not have anti-haitianismo as a dogma of the Dominican state. Yeah, and I can tell you, and I'll tell you how I know that. In 1847, the president was Pedro Santana, and there was a conspiracy against Pedro Santana. And the conspiracy was led by Los Hermanos Puello, two Black Dominican generals. Yeah, and Pedro Santana basically he became a dictator, but he was also very legalistic. So he said, okay, so these were the crimes and so on and so forth. When you go to look at the record and you look at the list of people who are involved in the conspiracy, you see names of Dominicans and Haitians, and you know that they are they are Dominicans and Haitians because it says the list gives you birthplaces. So you say something like Pedro Guzman de Santiago, Henri Laferrière from Jacmel, and so on and so forth. And all of the people who were involved in the conspiracy received punishment in proportion to their involvement. Los Hermanos Puello, who were the leaders, they get killed, of course, but all the others, they only received whatever, in proportion to their involvement. But never does the Haitianness, yeah, of those conspirators mean anything in the language of the documents. It was just like conspirators, period. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that to me is very telling. That disappears. Once 1844 happens, the very first thing that Los Gringos do, yeah, is to rush to the Dominican government, to the newly minted Dominican government, to find out what they're going to do about Haiti. Yeah, what is going, and are you not? Basically, this is what the commercial agent, the U.S. commercial agent says. Are you not worried that with so many Black people in your population, they might unite with your neighbor, and then turn this into a black republic. Yeah, you know, and you know they said no, we kind of okay, but it was clear to the Dominican authorities in 1844 that these gringos were an important partner because they controlled the hemisphere. They controlled the hemisphere beginning with in 1823 with the famous speech by President James Monroe, who says, who basically warns other powers, European and otherwise, not to mess with any of the republics of the Western Hemisphere because that was a U.S. field of interest, yeah?
Right.
And
So
that
we
they could suffer retaliation if they did not listen, yeah.
Right.
So Dominicans knew that they could not go head to head with the United States. The United States was worried about Haiti, and I should tell you another thing. John Calhoun, who had been a vice president under Andrew Jackson, yeah, is the most racist, the most negrophobic human being that the earth has produced. Yeah, he actually believed that race was what made possible the greatness of a country, and that meant whiteness. Yeah, for him. Yeah, I'll tell you this. In 1848, when the U.S. moved to take over half of the Mexican territory, which now is the American Southwest. Yeah. One of the few voices objecting was that of John Calhoun, and his objection is strictly in terms of the racial composition of that population.
Yeah.
Do we really want to bring into our fold these people who are mixed and so on and so forth? He says the Spanish territories in the Americas used to be great, but they allowed the population to mix. So now that's why they're in the trouble they're in. Yeah. And so that same person who is so clear about race is the very first person when the Dominican Republic proclaims its independence, who goes to the president and says, we have to recognize this nation.
Right.
We have to recognize this nation.
So we keep coming back to, you're bringing us back again to how central this relationship with the United States as a political and economic power is to the development of this. And I just want to invite us all, to all our viewers. I see lots of comments in the chat of folks expressing gratitude for the way you just took us through that period of history. I want to invite us all to take a deep breath. Whew. Thank you for that, Professor. I really appreciate that because, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but that 22-year period between 1822 and 1844 gets looked at a lot as the justification for a lot of that anti-haitianismo that we experience now on the island and in the diaspora. And so we'll come back to that to have a conversation a little bit about why you.
And the thing is that when the argument that Calhoun makes for why U.S. must recognize this country immediately is that this country is going to help us contain Negro influence in the Caribbean.
Right. So that U.S. interest was really important in terms.
So first of all, it gives that it makes it very clear to the authorities in the Dominican Republic that blackness is not going to get them very far, and that friendship with Haiti is not going to get them very far in the eyes of the boss. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great transition. The next conversation we wanted to have with you is that in your book, you write about the importance of understanding the distinction between the way racial consciousness developed in the DR versus in the US. And you've already talked a little bit about how that related to the early colonial period and the distinctions between the way slavery was, the institution of slavery played out between the two countries. But you specifically talk about the development of what you call a deracialized social thought in the Dominican Republic that I thought was just a really powerful and fascinating idea. And so I was wondering and by that just briefly, you talk about that's the way in which, in that sort of thinking, nationality is elevated above race in self-identity. And so can you help us understand a little bit more about what that means and why it's important in this conversation?
First, the question is only important. The question asking is only important because of how racialized we are. Yeah, but that itself is a new development. My book, The Fracture of the Human, which I'll finish as soon as we right after the end of this conversation. I'm just kidding. You know, there's so more work to be done yet. But it's basically what it tries to do is how antiquity dealt with difference of phenotype and ancestry. And there was never, but also how antiquity dealt with the human quality of the vanquished. There was never a need in antiquity to actually diminish the humanity of the vanquished. You had already diminished them materially by virtue of vanquishing them. But the idea that then you would employ scribes to produce discourses, yeah, to disparage the humanity, the morality, the ethics, the beauty, and everything about them, yeah, it speaks of a problem that has to do with the psychopathology of a particular kind of conqueror who came to the leadership of domination at one point in history. Yeah, it has to do with Christians needing to do bad things but remaining good because they were Christian. Yeah, and so basically you find fault in the vanquished. Yeah, and therefore what you're doing to them is not bad, but actually it's actually good. And so on and so forth. Yeah, but that's a different matter. And the question of racialization in the hemisphere, and this is not in the book that you're referring to, in the hemisphere is where the racial construction of humanity, right, was effectuated. With the conquest and colonization of the Americas. That is the shift from other conquerors in antiquity who were either Greeks or Romans or Ottoman, yeah, and then now became Christians who were decent human beings, yeah, because they were the children of God, and they subscribed to a faith which had the Almighty turn Himself into vulgar flesh and to die on the cross for them so they could be good. Yeah. So if they're going to be doing evil, yeah, they had to be. I mean, they were treading a difficult line. Yeah. So either you stop doing it, or you find a way to turn it into something else. And out of that comes the dogma of racism, which is first codified in the mid-16th century, in a text written by Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda, which is phenomenal. It's phenomenal text because it shows, and this has to do primarily with how to justify the domination of the indigenous population, taking all of their stuff, yeah, including their hours, yeah, including their family structures, societies, and everything, yeah. And then how to turn that into something that is pious. Yeah, that is where Alexander did not have that problem. Kublai Khan did not have that problem. Mansa Musa, the great African conqueror, did not have that problem. Yeah, Mansa Musa had Mansa Musa traveled to Cairo from the that empire was called. Mansa Musa had in his entourage, he had 1,200 slaves who were also dark-skinned like him. But that the idea that the enslaved person was a different kind of humanity, that was not around. Yeah. So it is now that we can ask. Now we have to ask that question: how is it? But now what I am trying to do is to try to get my students to recover the sense of wonder, to recover the sense of bewilderment about why is it that we have to think of ourselves as races, yeah, as members of races, instead of us children of God, right? Why is it? And the answer, in order to answer it, you have to recover a history that we have lost. That is so lost to us that it's even hard to entertain the question for a student today. Yeah. So I would say the nationality is a lot more natural thing than the race. When the Biafrans would try to separate from Nigeria in 1960s, ending in 1970, the Biafra Republic tried to separate from Nigeria, yeah, because they regarded themselves as ethnically, nationally different, a different vision of their future, yeah, and so they wanted to separate, and there was that Biafran War. I've had colleagues, African colleagues, who were soldiers in the Biafran War. So it is okay to want to separate from another of the same phenotype as you, just as the Christians themselves, Europeans themselves, have been doing throughout history, from antiquity until they discovered one common source of antipathy that they could all share. Yeah, as a result of an economic development, which created a boom for what then became the West. Yeah. So no, if I had to say it, I will not be able to say enough to explain it, but take it from me. Believe me now, and then think about it later. Thinking of oneself as a racial being, is not normal in the large historic sense. Yeah, and I would argue that that when Martin Luther King went to bed at night, he thought of himself strictly in relation to his location in the universe, in relation to his God. Yeah, that is why he at one point said in one of his speeches, which I quote somewhere, that even as we continue to fight against white supremacy, we must protect ourselves from the moral weakness of harboring black supremacist thoughts. Yeah, and that, of course, is not something that you'll hear quoted very often, because it sounds like it's not good for, quote unquote, the movement.
Right. And I think, thank you for that, Professor. And I think, what was interesting to me in reading this section here was that because of what you talked about, this development of deracialized social thought, this privileging of nationality, you argue that you have an absence of Black affirmation as a strategy for social resistance in the Dominican Republic. And I think that's particularly interesting when we look at, try to understand the Dominican Republic as a nation and Dominican people, this whole conversation around Dominicans' relationship to Blackness as an identity. If you could say a little bit about that, why we didn't see the development of that Black affirmation as a stand that people took in their social resistance, even though we have a system of oppression and anti-Blackness built into all the institutions and systems in the Dominican Republic from that lineage, that vestiges of colonialism that you already mentioned.
But it's also important. It's also important to observe closely. Yeah, a lot of the African American textbooks, I mean, there are of course very noble exceptions, like Kimberly Sims' book. I believe she's on the list. She's in our, just listening in our conversation. But she is an African American person who spent time in Santiago, I believe in other parts of the Dominican Republic, and came out with what I recommend as the most engaging, the most engaging understanding of Black issues and racial issues in the Dominican Republic. But that has to do with the fact that she did not do an analysis of Joaquin Balaguer to find out what Dominicans thought racially. She did not do an analysis of Manuel Arturo Peña Valle to think of what Dominicans thought racially. She went to the base, and she went on the ground, and she spoke with people, and she looked at all the contradictions, the affirmation, together with the negation. Yeah, my mother was she spoke Negrophobic. Yeah, she spoke Negrophobic, but she practiced African descended cultural forms. When you saw her worshiping, with Los Santos and her altar, yeah, the movements she was making in the headdress handkerchief around her head, yeah, was such that if the Vatican saw her, she'll be excommunicated, yeah, for being non-Catholic and non-Christian, yeah. But her religion was basically African descended, and that is actually how many of our of people, African descended people in the Americas, have actually built their sense of the unspeakable. All right, the sense by bringing together this amalgamation of religious forms, yeah, taking from Christianity, taking from Vodou, taking from Santeria, taking from the Brazilian versions of the African religious experience, and so on. Yeah, so we have in the Dominican Republic, a person who studies the Dominican society, racially speaking, strictly in terms of intellectual history, yeah, yeah, focusing on the generation that was writing on demand by the Trujillo dictatorship, which did institute, found it convenient to institute a white supremacist ethos. Yeah, a person who depends on that will never get a clue of what Dominicans are in terms of the understanding of themselves. You could actually, here's the story. My mom, she's speaking about Los Negros next door, yeah? And how the maleducados, bad manners and so on and so forth. And I go to her, this is after I had already gone to Brooklyn College and had had developed a vocabulary with which to speak about, with my parents, with my mother especially, about these issues, but in a manner that was not demeaning or authoritative, because now I went to college, I know more than you about everything, right? But I said, but Mom, I didn't know you thought that way about me. I freaked her out. She went like, what are you talking about? What you just said about Los Negros. What does that have to do with you? So that I think is telling, in that it gives us a picture of how weird this notion of race is. Yeah. What is the race of the Hutus as compared with that of the Tutsis? Yeah. Or what is the race of the Biafrans as compared with the rest of Nigerians? Yeah. We have not spent enough. We have proceeded as if we understand what race is. I tell you that I feel much better now, because I am now more willing to accept the bewilderment and the confusion.
Thank you.
And retain the question.
Can I follow up with a question really quickly? So I want to bring us to the problem of anti-haitianismo in Dominican society, because as we've seen, clearly we've been played, community, we've been played. We have the receipts, we have the data, the historical data of those first 5 years after 1844, showing that there wasn't this racial animus that motivated the separation, and that this anti-haitianismo that Trujillo really projected onto Dominican identity was not there. And so today, though, would you say anti-haitianismo has become a racial racial thought in Dominican Republic, because people, señores,
We understand.
oh, I'm in the R, so this is what happens. So, you know, would you say that it's become a racial thought, racial thinking, rather than just xenophobia, or rather, you guys are really funny. The chat section is really funny. So rather than just it being xenophobia, or rather than it just being a particular kind of like, what would you say that has become racialized thinking, and what are the consequences of that?
See, the Dominican state had to articulate anti-Haitian an anti-Haitian ethos for the sake of retaining the support of the likes of John Cahoon and company, right? Who have continued. But in addition to that, anti-haitianismo is a lot more global than that. When Frederick Douglass went to the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, Haiti had hired him as a guest speaker for the Haitian Pavilion at this World Exposition, Chicago, 1893. In this one of the speeches that Douglass delivers there, 1893, he speaks of what a miracle it is. Remember, 1893, 1893. What a miracle it is that Haiti is still standing, given the constancy or the hostility, he says, from the entire civilized world. Yeah? By the civilized world, he means the Christian West, meaning the societies that were connected with the colonial transaction. Yeah? If your economy is plantation, enslavement, and stuff like that, and has been, or after in the case of the United States, after slavery, it became slavery again under Jim Crow, after Reconstruction, and so on. If you have justified your permission to do harm to these people, to people of this ancestry, on the basis of your superiority, how are you going to then reward a country that proves you wrong? Yeah, a country that beats the heck out of the Napoleonic army, yeah, that produces the likes of Toussaint Louverture, from being a horse person, tending the horse, to being what he became, right, with the thought and the Enlightenment. Yeah, how are you going to do that? I mean, everything about the intellectual capacity, about the courage, about the faith, about the honesty, all of that gets thrown down the drain. So you are not going to do anything to contribute to the success of that national project. On the very contrary, you are going to do everything you can to make sure it does not succeed. And one of the ways, for instance, in which, and this becomes, of course, complicated, there's a book by Brenda Plummer called, I believe, if my old man's memory serves me, Haiti and the World Power. It covers the period, the end of the 19th century through 1915, in which she shows that since the Haitian elites tended to have a liking, tended to show a liking for lighter people, that it was possible for men coming with nothing in their pockets from Europe and come to Haiti and make themselves available as spouses for some of the first families in Haiti. and that their whiteness will buy them will buy them marriages that not only made them rich, but gave them influence in Haiti. And that influence, because they also became Haitian citizens in that process, that influence they quite often use to arrange commerce between Haiti and their homelands, in which the clear intent was to benefit their homeland to the detriment of Haiti economically. Yeah. So La Bragueta has also been, how do you say that? Has also been a way for people to conspire, for the West to conspire against Haiti. France, United States. In the United States, the plantation freaked out. The entire plantation economy freaked out when Haiti succeeded. During the revolution, Haiti succeeded. And so, in fact, when you read, for instance, the famous anti-slavery novel by a woman Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you get to a black character who is planning his escape to Canada, and in speaking with his supporters to seek their assistance, he makes sure to explain that when he succeeds, he and his people succeed, they're not going to be like those Haitians, yeah, who engaged in violence against whites and that sort of thing, right? So the defamation of Haiti has a very long history. I tell the story of that in an essay which was published in Costa Rica. It's called El antihaitianismo como ideología occidental. The entire West, yeah. So there is a very, in fact, Balaguer himself in La Isla al Revés, he quotes the famous racial thinker of France, on the inequality of races. What's his name? On the inequality of races. Sur l'inégalité des races humaines. Balaguer quotes that guy who published his book, 5 volumes in the 1850s, and Balaguer quotes the comparison that Gobineau, yeah, here's the name, Gobineau, the comparison that Gobineau makes in 1853 between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and shows a preference, not admiration, yeah, but a preference for the Dominican side on the basis of what they have achieved, because of the greater quotient of white blood in their veins, yeah, as compared to Haiti. Yeah? So the Dominican Republic did not have to invent anti-Haitianism. Yeah? Anti-Haitianism was invented the very moment the government of Christophe, the government of Henri Christophe, had this phenomenal thinker. My memory is not helping now, but he's a God. What's his name? Count. During the government of Christophe, in the first decade of the 19th century, there is already discursive production in Haiti itself, yeah, refuting anti-Haitianism, the violent anti-Haitianism that is happening already throughout most of the Christian West, especially those countries in the Christian West that are connected with the economy that the colonial transaction produced.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Really appreciate the way that. Wow, I'm getting it. Thank you for the laid out explanation on anti-haitianismo. So I want to move into the question and answer section of the. Yeah, I'm getting back to. I see comments in the doc.
I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, great. And I think I lost the echo. You all let me know if you hear the feedback. Okay, great. So I do want to make a little time, in this conversation. I know we don't have very much time left to take at least a couple questions from the Q&A. We got some really great questions in there. So I want to ask one last question from us, Professor, but it's going to be with a caveat that you may just have to tell us who it is and not tell us much more about them. If maybe you can answer in 1 minute the answer to this question, because it's really important for us if we want to center Black Dominicans and Black movements in the telling of our history. Who would you say is maybe one of the most important? You detail lots of different Black figures and important people in Dominican history, but who is like particularly important to you right now to uplift if you had to answer that question right now in this moment?
I can tell you, I could tell you all the way from Gregorio Luperón. I could tell you all the way from Francisco Rosado Sanchez. Presidents, right? Dominican presidents who are Black, yeah? 130 years before you have Barack Obama, yeah? Mm-hmm. I could tell you all of those. But for me, the seminal figure is a man named Jose Francisco Peña Gomez, yeah? Because even though he was not my ideology, he was just a liberal politician, yeah? He was somebody who was Blacker than anybody else, yeah? And managed to impose his dignity, managed to impose his authority over the political space in the Dominican Republic. He actually was the 20th century's the political leader in the 20th century with the largest popular support. And in 1996, he won the election, yeah, though he did not become president, yeah, because of the fraud that we know, fully documented, yeah. But he did so at the same time where the Balaguer and PLD coalition were using anti-haitianismo and negrophobia, yeah, as a way to scare the population from the possibility of electing Peña Gomez. And they still voted for him in massive numbers, yeah?
Right.
To me, I do not regard the fact that Peña Gomez did not get to the palace and receive the band of the presidential band as a loss. I think his story is a story of triumph against every possible means. Imagine the government under Balaguer with all the media under his control, yeah, and still could not convince the American people not to vote for him.
Right. Thank you for uplifting Peña Gomez on this call. So we're gonna move to Q&A. Thank you all so much for all the questions, and thank you, Professor, for this amazing conversation and all the knowledge that you're dropping on us right now. So the first question that we're gonna go to came from one of our viewers that says this: if slavery in the Dominican Republic could be seen as quote unquote fluid and laid back, if they had it so good, why did they yearn for and fight for their freedom?
Slavery is never good. Slavery is never good except when it is. The way, for instance, it was for Terence, the Roman slave who became the most important Roman playwright, or the way it was for Aesop, the Greek slave who became the creator of the literary genre we know today as a fable, right? When slavery, there were times when slavery in antiquity, when slavery was preferable to poverty, yeah? But to say that there were relaxed, lines, right? That is not to say that it was good or to justify the enslavement of people. It only means to say that it was not what it became, yeah? And what it was not what it became in the places where enslavement was the most profitable operation going, yeah? In the Dominican Republic, slavery ceased to have ceased to yield the profit that it yielded in other places, and as a result, it was okay for the institution to be a bit more playful. It could not be pliable in the U.S. South because they depended on that. Yeah, that's why they were able to continue it 75 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Mm. Thank you for that, Professor. I know you're on mute, Saudi. So maybe we can unmute Saudi.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Torres-Saillant. So right now across the US, we're seeing the dismantling of monuments to the Confederacy in the South and in other parts of the country. So what is your view with regards to toppling down symbols of racism and colonialist violence, such as the statue of Christopher Columbus in Santo Domingo?
I'm of two minds there. On the one hand, I'm afraid I'm afraid that dismantling the visible memory of that horrendous past might cause the memory to disappear. Especially, and then the memory will become the specialized, the specialized treasure of those individuals who have the luxury to inquire into the past. But regular human beings may have a problem with that. I would prefer instead every time you have John C. Calhoun to have Frederick Douglass, or to have a leader of a slave insurrection right next to him, and basically have both stories told together. Yeah. So here, this is what this person did. Yeah, and this is what this person did in response. To me, that helps, because ultimately, in the end, racism is a way of knowing. Yeah, it's a way of knowing the other across ancestral phenotypical difference. And if you don't go at it through knowledge, not education, but knowledge of a different kind from what they have learned. Yeah, they have learned to admire only Calhoun. But what if you put next to him on the pedestal right next to him, somebody who represents a call to humanity, yeah, a call to human decency, and people who were able to give their lives, put their lives on the line all the time, yeah, denied education, denied religious instruction, denied everything, yeah, and yet they managed to assert their humanity. That is what I want. I don't want, for us to erase the past. I want us to remember the past, and for the people with less access to the privileged education that you and I have, yeah, physical things, public memory is very important, yeah? Which is why the way that they're doing in New York City, bringing the women into the public memory through sculptures, yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Another question, and this connects to a piece of the conversation that we didn't have time to really get to, which is the role of diasporas in this conversation. But the question reads, how can we do the anti-racist work in spaces where race is a taboo subject, while not imposing US concepts of race / the US process of racialization? And that goes not just for the Dominican Republic, but all over Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean.
I believe that just as the forces, the structures of oppression can benefit from U.S. resources, yeah, the State Department and all of that. You know, when the right wing in Venezuela it has the support of Mike Pompeo and has the support of the Donald. Yeah, I think in the same way, if you are in Chile, if you are an Afro-Chileno, Afro-Peruano, Afro-Dominicano, and you have you're perfectly entitled to look for clues. I mean, we are this phenomenon of the colonial transaction. They say is the most transnational event that has ever been. Yeah, we cannot be patriotic. No, I only fight for freedom in ways that are strictly in accordance with what my parents taught me. well, what about the things that your parents did not have access to? Yeah. So I believe that what we cannot do is import the paradigms without creolizing them. Yeah. The old paradigms, in order to make sense, in order to matter, in order not to be seen as penetración cultural, yeah, they have to be real. And to be real, they have to be based on what's happening on the ground. And so in that respect, I think people may use whatever lessons the civil rights movement and the continued Black struggle, has to offer, yeah, while at the same time making sure that they draw from their own history, yeah, that in the Dominican Republic, in Santo Domingo, for both Haitians and Dominicans, starts in 1502, yeah. In 1502, the first enslaved Africans come on the ship of Ovando, and Governor Ovando, 1502. 1503, you have the administrators of the colony writing back to Spain, complaining about resistance, complaining about runaway slaves, complaining about Maroons, getting together with the Taínos and creating trouble for the economy. Yeah. So we need to be able to draw from that. We should be humble. Yeah. And we should not dismiss what our people have done in terms of struggling, like whatever Peña Gomez had to do to deal with a constant defamation, while at the same time as maintaining what he had, whatever strength of spirit he had to achieve what he achieved. Yeah. So I think yeah, it's okay to borrow, but don't borrow without transforming into the Creole reality. And also, do not borrow. Do not use only what you borrow. Yeah. See what the connection is between what you borrow and what you already had in the own trajectory of your people.
Okay, we're going to have one last question. This is a question that for me is very interesting. One of the audience members asked it, but it's something that I've been asking myself. And it's a question that has to do with the ways in which white who became Dominicans, proto-Dominicans, how they have been able to gain power in Dominican society, right? And so I'm looking to see, it was right here. I just lost the question, my bad. So sorry, everybody, I lost the question. But essentially, it's a question about how Creole white Dominicans have been able to maintain power in Dominican society today, to the point where if one Googles 10 wealthiest Dominican families, they're all elite, white, Euro-descendant families. And so how do you reconcile the fluidity of Dominican society with the continued power of these particular elite families? How did that happen? How can we go about doing that? That's my question.
It happened. That is why we need social transformation. Yeah, that is why we need to do. That's why we need strategically. Yeah, strategically to think racially. Yeah, strategically only to think racially, so that we can see what you are seeing. But that it is not that they have become, the powerful. Is that that's what they were from the start. Yeah, the societies of the Americas that became independent republics were not created for the benefit of the subaltern populations. They were not created for the indigenous populations, for the African population, for the Asian indentured workers who came as indentured workers. They were created for the descendants of the conquerors. Yeah. So even I mean, if you look at the genealogy of all the great leaders, they descend. It's a direct line of descent from the conquerors. So when the republics when the republics were started, they did not have any, they did not feel any urge to redefine social relations according to ancestry and phenotype and origins. They just kept on doing whatever was being done during the colony. Yeah, so that is basically the problem. They have what they've always had, and we in the United States, in that regard, the greater violence of the United States, the greater violence of the United States racism has triggered greater progress from the subaltern populations. Yeah? Because in the United States, it was very clear that the laws were enacted explicitly to exclude populations. We did not have that in most other places in the Americas. The exclusion was something that operated in some kind of a cultural, unspoken understanding of where everyone belonged. And then the notion of mestizo, right? The mestizo said, the notion of mestizo, when it became important, suggested that since we were all mixed, that it doesn't matter. We're all the same. We don't have races. That is why when the Afro-Dominicanos stage their movements, they are often seen as extranjerizantes, right? They're often seen as bringing stuff to the Dominican Republic that's not natural there. But the fact is that white supremacy is the rule of the game in the Americas, and so. So how do we fight? How do we fight it? We try to do two things. We try to on the one hand racialize ourselves strategically to the point of establishing that it is the racialized populations, the non-white populations, that are doing worst. Yeah, so that the society can see it and hear it, and the friends can, and many have. While at the same time as we retain the ability of people where nationality is more important, the ability not to think of ourselves as primarily racial beings, because once you become racial, once you become a racial being, only the conquest and colonization of the hemisphere has achieved its ultimate triumph. You cease to be a human being, yeah, responsive to your God and to the universe, and become responsive to your skin, and that is the saddest thing that can happen, and that is what I believe Martin Luther King did not have. I believe when he went to bed at night, he was an absolute human being, and then he went back to being black first thing in the morning when the struggle needed to continue.
Thank you so much, Professor Saillant. This has been just an amazing panel, an amazing lecture. It's incredible. And so many people who have so many questions about our identity are going to walk away with so much knowledge, and also very rich and theoretical and wonderful understanding of how to maneuver the challenges of this moment. Of waging a racial struggle to become more human, to reclaim our humanities, to not be bound by these structures. So thank you so much. I just want to put in a quick plug to Encultured Company. For Encultured Company, we are a public education, peace and reconciliation organization, and our goal is to build bridges where others have built barriers. And we do all this work because we really believe in our island. We believe so much. I got it tattooed on my wrist because I believe so much in our liberation and our empowerment. And we want you all to find ways to support us, bring us to your schools, bring us to your workspaces. bring us to all these spaces that need this conversation, right? New York City has 656,000 Dominicans by the 2010 census, but we have so few professors of Dominican studies in our universities. We don't have Dominican studies as an ethnic studies curriculum in our high schools. We really need this work. We really need this education so the next generation doesn't have to start from scratch with our struggle for Black liberation. So visit our website, donate to us, hire us. We do all kinds of workshops, and look out for our flagship Decolonizing Hispaniola workshop that we're gonna have in September. Yes, please.
And a shout out to the Hispaniola studies people, those people who are, this already a generation, you know, of Dominicans and Haitians and non-Dominican or Haitians who are working on Hispaniola, looking at the ways in which you can understand one country without the other, right? And so shout out to that. And I would finally say that if I had to leave you with one word, I would say make sure that nobody dupes you into believing that race or racism is a simple thing or that is a logical thing. Yeah, you need to approach it. You need to approach it with the desire to decipher, you know, what is happening here, right? What is happening here? And I would be mostly afraid of, in my fight against racism, to deploy racist paradigms, which I've seen it happening all the time. Yeah, the moment you do that, racism won.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silvio Torres-Saillant. His book, Introduction to Dominican Blackness, there's a link to it if you're live on our Zoom right now, and we sent it out to everyone who RSVP'd. We'll make sure to post it on the In Culture Company social media. Whether you're watching this live with us right now or you're watching a recording, I just want to invite you to take a deep breath in gratitude for Dr. Torres-Saillant and all that he's offered us today, in gratitude for this powerful history that he's uplifted, our powerful Black ancestors, the Black women and LGBTQIA+ folks in our history whose names we don't know or whose names haven't been carried forward in the history books that we've learned. Giving gratitude for all of our ancestors that have allowed us to be here now in this moment, and dedicating the fruit of this time that we've spent together right now to those that are fighting for our liberation right now at this very moment, and all of those who are coming after us. We thank you so much on behalf of Encultured Company for your time with us tonight here, Dr. Torres-Saillant. And we thank all of you for being here with us. There will be recordings of this conversation that will be going up on our social media platforms and on YouTube. Please make sure to support Dr. Torres-Saillant, his work. He has a book coming out soon. He just told us that he's gonna finish writing it tonight. We are excited. And we do ask for your support for Encultured Company however you can, and also to the groups that are on the ground right now in the Dominican Republic fighting for black liberation, fighting for the rights of Dominicans of Haitian descent. I want to lift up Reconocido, and Saudi, if you want to lift up any other, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Let's see, we're gonna figure out this muting situation. Oh yeah, go ahead, Saudi, and type them. But yeah, we do invite you to, oh, there you go, you're unmuted, Saudi.
I wanna uplift Acción Afro-Dominicana. I wanna uplift the work of Maribel Núñez, who's been doing this work for generations. There's so many freedom fighters in our community that don't get enough recognition. But yeah, let's uplift those two names, Acción Afro-Dominicana, and also Reconocido.
Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Professor. And we will look out for an invitation to our next Encultured Company's summer school series. It's gonna be dope. Take a look at those for an invitation, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you all so much. Bye.